Thank you.
Infrastructure plan basically is just about what the facilities, the infrastructure you're putting in place.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah. They're asking for it.
So that concludes our public input today, members. There is no local board input at this stage. There are no extraordinary items, no notices of motion, which brings us to our first item of real business for us to make decisions on at least, and that is item 9, and that's the Auckland Smarter Transport Pricing Project. And welcome David Hawkey and Josh Arbery. We have a PowerPoint. Members, you will recall we workshopped this as well, so the quick reference is on page 15 of the separate documents if you've got your hub open. And I have an added recommendation here, and I will move, and I have a second from the Deputy Chair. The recommendations before us, with the addition of a C, it's coming up, requesting that the key project milestones be reported back to this planning committee on a regular basis.
How often?
Well, until we get into the early stages of the work, we won't know how often, but I assure you they will be reported back here on a regular basis. So, David, in your hands to open.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Honourable Mayor. Thank you, members. So I've got a presentation that I'll quickly run through the key points of the item, and then I'll take questions at the end of the presentation, then I'll put forward the item for consideration. I suppose to walk through the purpose of this report. Basically, this report is to update the Planning Committee on the progress to give effect to ATAP's, which is the Auckland Transport Alignment Project's recommendation to establish a dedicated project to evaluate smarter transport pricing in Auckland. And it also seeks confirmation of the delegation to the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor to provide political oversight and make formal decisions to progress the various phases of the project in accordance to section 6.1 of the terms of reference of this project. Just to give a bit of an overview of the project's purpose and context, the Smarter Transport Project was identified and the ATAP's recommended strategic approach was adopted by Council in September 2016. As you'll see in the report, there was both, I suppose, a recognition of the opportunities that smarter transport pricing could provide, as well as some of the challenges of not having approaches to manage demand. There's a table in the report that shows that primarily one of the biggest modelled changes to Auckland's transport performance was when smarter transport pricing was included in the modelling. So the purpose of the project is to undertake a thorough investigation sufficient to support a decision on whether or not to proceed with inducing pricing for transport demand for management purposes in Auckland. Just need to be very clear, this is not about implementing or doing smarter transport pricing at this stage. It is very much the evaluation of the opportunity. It's a multi-agency project, which we are one part of, but also the New Zealand Transport Agency, the State Service Commission, Treasury and the Minister of Transport are the key partners on this project. The project terms of reference was signed by the chief executives of all those agencies in late May, June, and the project was launched on the 7th of June. Jim Quinn circulated a memo with the terms of reference to all the members of this committee on the 7th of June. I suppose to understand the primary objective and scope of this project, the primary object of the project is to improve the performance of Auckland's transport network primarily through reduction of congestion by enabling more efficient travel demand patterns. So that's the essence of it. But as part of that, and the next slide will go through, is that there'll be an investigation or consideration given to the broader effects that such a opportunity provides in terms of economic, social and environmental effects, and I'll go through those in a bit more detail in a second. Smarter pricing will raise revenue as part of any potential scheme, and the project will analyse in terms of options what that will mean, but ultimately the use of any revenue is not currently in scope of this project. In terms of the key considerations, as I said before, it's really and there's also an appendix in the report which goes into this in more detail. The key factors the evaluation will take into account are around ensuring the key impacts of pricing of those using the transport system is thoroughly understood, particularly in regards to fairness, equity and distribution effects. I can take questions at the end perhaps, are understood and addressed. That any pricing system is cost effective to implement, operate, administer and enforce, ensuring pricing is flexible and adaptable to changing circumstances such as technology, ensuring that transparency of the use of any net revenue raised by a pricing system for demand managers in Auckland is understood, and understanding national and regional implications of any impacts, including effects on the existing land transport pricing system. So just to reiterate, the project essentially is an options evaluation exercise. In terms of the key deliverables and timing, and there is another attachment in the report that highlights some of the key tasks that are in the project. There are 3 distinct phases, and in effect each phase is where there will be a recommendation to go to the next phase. The first phase is a progress report in November, which is really understanding and updating what is, I suppose, Auckland's future transport performance if there was no pricing put in effect. So there's actually a lot of background work in this phase to update things like the transport model to allow it to look at things like pricing. There'll be identification of a comprehensive plan of engagement for the public and stakeholders, and there'll also be understanding of could there be demonstrations as a part of that sort of engagement. Phase 2 is in effect where the fundamental evaluation starts. We will move from an identification of a long list of potential options. These will be evaluated and refined to a short list of potential options, and that will finish in late 2018, date to be confirmed. And then phase 3, a final report in probably mid-2019, will be brought to the committee, which will outline the comprehensive evaluation, including cost-benefit analysis of the short list of options, and this will provide a recommendation on a preferred scheme pathway or future next steps for the consideration of the committee. In terms of governance arrangements, the terms of reference outlines these, but just to put in summary, Minister in Finance and the Minister of Transport are providing project oversights for Cabinet. For consistency and also to allow engagement with the ministers, it's proposed that the Mayor and Deputy Mayor provide oversight and make formal decisions to progress through the phases of the Smarter Transport project, and that says clause 6.1 of the terms of reference, and that's what we're recommending for adoption today. Deliverable at the conclusion of each phase will be provided to the Deputy Minister of Transport, Minister of Finance, Mayor and Deputy Mayor will act as gateways. In practice, there's a lot of opportunities as a committee to engage in this process. We can provide updates and discussions at the planning bi-monthly workshops. Key milestones will be recommended to the reported to the planning committee, and at the end of the project, one of the most major decisions is really in terms of the final options, what to do with those. So, our progress to date, it is fair to say primarily that the project has been in an establishment phase. It's been the partners have come together to bring together the terms of reference, and also identification of a project plan of work for over this time. There has been work on an evaluation approach which is attached to this, attached to the report. There's been work on understanding some of the lessons that could be learnt from overseas smarter transport pricing systems, and there's been the development of a communications and engagement strategy. The last 2 parts there are currently being still discussed with the chief executives. So that comes to the end of my presentation, so I now open it to questions, and I'll take them as I come through you, I suppose, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David. Questions at this time, members? Councillor Casey, question, and then
I've got
Councillor
2
Wayne
questions
Walker.
and I reserve the right to speak. Just to state up front, there were 2 votes against this road pricing implementation over 10 years at that confidential meeting on the 10th of September. One was myself and the other was Councillor Mike Lee. and I will be holding firm to that position today for a number of very good reasons. But my two questions. The first one is, I'm very surprised there's no local boards here today rattling spears, because I think you've done them a great injustice by assigning them to a communications and information strategy or something that's hasn't even been written yet. This, no, I'll have a wee speech as well as the question, because people do that all the time. The reason I'm asking that question is
It's
that
moved and seconded, so you're welcome to make your comment now too.
what's happening here is we started with the public of Auckland, and we started with a mayor, not this one, who said there should be a referendum on road pricing. And now we've truncated that to almost alienate the public. By the time the public gets climbing back into this, it'll be down to options in late 2018, by which time there'll be no way you can change the options, because it'll either be A, B, C, D or E. And if you want to change it, well, where's your evidence and what's your background? So what I'm suggesting is the public, which was back then invited to be part of this decision, has been written out the equation. And the public is represented by us now and the local boards. But effectively, the local boards have been written out of this equation too. And I'll ask you to look at paragraph, wherever it is, 17, wherever it is, paragraph 26. And look at where the local boards have been put. It says, in parallel with the public announcement of the project, local board chairs were informed about the project and were sent the terms of reference. Whoop-de-doo. Next sentence. The communications and engagement strategy currently being developed, not written yet, will identify the ways local boards will be involved in the project. That is shocking. We are currently going through a governance review, looking at how we work with local boards, and to say to them, actually, we haven't figured it out yet. So my question to you is, where is that? No, well, it's not even a question, really. It's through the chair. I think that that's not sufficient, and I think we need to have an alternative way of communicating with the local boards over this really important matter, which changes the whole nature of transport in Auckland, and I'll come on to that later. So that's not good enough. In a yet-to-be-written strategy, that's the way we're going to do it, in a yet-to-be-written strategy. So I'd seek some comment from the chair or even from the mayor on that. Shocker, absolute shocker.
So look, I'll just comment at the outset, members. Since the commencement of this term of council, both the Deputy Chair and myself have discussed how we communicate the agenda and all the items on the agenda more deliberately with local boards. Every chair and every relationship manager and every senior advisor receives this agenda, and it's been discussed at local board services as well. And our intention was to make sure that all local board chairs and senior management at local boards know about the content of agenda. It has been done so ahead of this meeting as well. We've received no call for local board input on this matter or any other matter on the whole of the agenda. And I make it very clear that that door is always open. Regarding the other question, I think there will be closer socialisation with local board chairs, and I know the Mayor has got a speaking opportunity or some questions later on. He might like to address that. That is the intention, but we're at the early stages here now, very early stages. That's my answer at this stage, Councillor Casey.
So that's one of my grievances. My second grievance is about the use of the money. In the report yourself, in your paragraph 17, like, this is about money, right? I know you're now calling it congestion charge, and it's all about getting cars off the road, but actually this is about bringing in revenue. And for you not to be addressing where that revenue goes, when in your report yourself says it's more palatable to the public if they know it's going towards public transport or alternatives to cars. So that's another thing. It's like, I do not understand why you're dressing it up as congestion charging, not admitting there is a revenue and this is where the revenue is going to be used. And until we've got public transport up to speed, you shouldn't be gathering any revenue. That's just an addition. So my question is, the revenue should be addressed. If you're bringing in revenue, that's what this is about.
Thank you. Have you finished your
So
speaking
I'm
to?
suggesting that's a question to you, Mr Chairman, whether you would suggest that this is in the scope of the project. This is what this is about at base.
I will go back to the terms of reference and ask David to address the terms of reference as they apply to the question of the focus of decongestion versus revenue gathering.
I suppose just to, thank you, Mr Chair, just to answer that, I mean, primarily, as I said before, this project is about using pricing for demand management. Undoubtedly, the revenue will be arose through such, if any...
Totally.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is the essence, I suppose the essence of any pricing scheme is you put a price and you hope that that will change behaviours around the demand for transport services, I suppose. So there will be revenue. However, if you do look at 4.2.4 in the terms of reference, it does state that the need for transparency on the use of any net revenue raised by any pricing system for demand management purpose in Auckland. So I suppose the terms of reference is trying to address the fact, yes, there will be revenue raised and it will be analysed as a part of the evaluation.
If I might just refer you, David, to your paragraph 17, which you say, in order to ensure the public acceptability of smarter transport pricing, the ultimate use of revenue, quote, needs to be the subject of separate discussion with government. It's not up there. So if that's in your report, that should be up there. It needs to be the subject of it. So where the money goes.
And I think that's what David has just referred to
Oh,
at
and the resolution's up
4.2.4, and it's there in black and white. It talks about transparency. So I think, in my view, Councillor, and I appreciate you being
He said
consistent.
it was out of scope, and if you go back to your slide, David, you said it was out of scope, correct?
Ultimately, I suppose what it's saying is the, if you look at the 4.2.4, yes, the revenue will be analysed as a part of the project. However, how the revenue applied is outside of the scope of the project because it's involved in a broader discussion with government. So that, but it will be clear that any scheme that is proposed, if a scheme is proposed, the revenue implications will be understood.
I have Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure.
So the motion is moved, so speaking turns are welcome, two members.
So I've got a number of concerns, and they go to issues that I've raised before. First of all, my question is the first question is around the context of road pricing generally, and I think acceptance that revenue from fuel taxes is in decline and will go into sharper decline as we see electrification taking off, and that's generally accepted. It also fits with the Council's low carbon plan. Given that circumstance, a number of overseas cities and countries are looking at a smart network based on kilometre or miles travelled to fund transport costs generally. So coming to my first question then, is that general context going to be taken into account in this study?
I mean, I think absolutely. This came out of ATAP, and in terms of how ATAP looked at smarter pricing, this is the replacement funding tool. And I think, in the long run, once you have all your vehicles are electric and you don't have any fuel tax being raised anymore, then you need a system like this to both deliver you better transport outcomes, but also to provide you with the revenue. It's just whether there's extra revenue or whether it's replacement revenue will be figured out as time goes on.
So that means that the revenue that we're talking about is not just revenue that's being used for congestion purposes, but for general road transport purchases.
I mean, I think whatever, the revenue question is complex because there's part of it is like, does it offset existing funding mechanisms or is it in addition? And you know, I just keep going back to 4.2.4, which suggests that depending on the options and depending on that we are looking at, they will have different revenue implications. But, you know, and I think what you're perhaps tying it to is the need for really good alternatives before you turn something like this on, and you need to find a way of funding those alternatives before you turn something like this on. And I think that's absolutely a core part of this project, is understanding what they are, when they will be available, and it could well be a very clear driver of the preferred options, at least in the short term, is, hey, what parts of the city do have good alternatives, because they might be the places that you start.
Okay, my next question runs with the last one, and that's around whether this study is going to look at the technology that might go to pricing but goes to a smart network. That is a network that identifies the vehicles, identifies where the vehicles are travelling, so that
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
enhance the network.
Yeah, I mean, too, the ultimate is this GNSS system, where essentially every vehicle is known where it is and when it is, and you know, that is the system that Singapore is in the process of implementing. At this point in time, it seems like a very expensive system, but I think as more cities around the world shift to that kind of system, which you can use for a whole pile of your sort of smarter approach to transport management in general, the costs will come down, and I'm sure that's the long run place that we'll end up, is something like that.
So do these terms of references allow for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have Megoff.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Look, the first point I want to make is that this is something I think every councillor should support, because it is about collecting the information we need in order to make a decision. If you look at para 14 in the paper, a thorough investigation sufficient to support a decision on whether or not to proceed. So this is not about the decision to proceed, it's about getting the information to make the decision on whether or not to proceed. And the terms of reference, I think, are very effectively put together to answer the questions that we need to know. It's about fairness, it's about cost effectiveness, it's about flexibility and changing over time, it's about ensuring the transparency in the use of the revenue. So I wasn't anticipating that there'd be a debate about these recommendations. I am anticipating that there'll be a debate about whether this is the right way to proceed, and I'll partly engage in that debate. Firstly, about revenue, I've got a different view from some of those who have spoken. The ministers, when they first started talking about this, said they wanted it to be revenue neutral, so that if we raised money through congestion pricing, then that we would reduce the cost of fuel tax and road user charges. I was worried about the ambiguity. It didn't say that the congestion charging would take place in Auckland and the reduction in petrol tax would take place across the country. But I had that discussion with the minister, and the ambiguity that existed has been taken out, so I'm pleased to report that. But in my view, this has got to be about two things. One, it's about changing behaviour, because we can provide a whole lot more infrastructure and spend billions of dollars more, but what we have to do is change behaviour towards public transport, towards active transport modes. And congestion charging, where it is operated across the world, has proven effective in doing that. We must change behaviour, because we don't want to, and we're not going to, spend billions of dollars building more and more motorways. We are about changing behaviour. But I've got to say, councillors, this is also about raising revenue, because if we want to change behaviour, we've got to have alternative, acceptable and convenient forms of transport to use, rather than us all lining up in the motorway in our 1.1 people per vehicle mode as we do at the moment. And everyone around this table knows that that figure of $7 billion deficit in the next 10 years for the Auckland Transport Alignment Project exists. $7 billion in deficit. It's real money we need, and we need to know where that money's going to come from. Now, at one stage, ministers were saying put it on the rates. I absolutely reject that. There is no clear connection between rates and use of transport in the way that changes behaviour. Rates means that you'd be applying the cost, as this council has done in the past, through the interim transport levy, to people regardless of whether or not they use the transport system. That seems to me to be dumb. Seems to me to be dumb that Sky City pays the same amount as a person on the minimum wage or a retired person out in the suburbs. So I reject the option of rates. The second one is fuel tax. You know my views about that. I won't go through it now. It's the quickest, most convenient, easiest way to do it, and we can raise the money now, and we need the money now. But at the moment, I haven't persuaded government of that. I intend to keep trying. The third suggestion was the one that this council adopted when it adopted the Auckland Transport Alignment Project, and that was to look at the concept of congestion charging, which could be tolls, or to pick up Wayne Walker's comment, it could be something more sophisticated. I've got to say I've looked at the more sophisticated system. Yes, it would charge you according to the time of the day and the level of congestion on the roads, but if you look at Singapore, they're having trouble with it. And if Singapore is having trouble with the technology and the cost, that should be a warning to the rest of us. So I'm a little bit nervous about leading the pack on saying we will have this global positioning satellite charging until we see it as a cost-effective way of doing it. And at the moment, I don't think there's evidence about that. So, but this report will be looking at what that is. And the fourth thing, of course, we can say, and it's an easy thing for all of us to say, well, the government ought to be paying more towards this out of existing revenue. That's true, but you can bet your bottom dollar that both the government and the rest of New Zealand expects us to be meeting some of those costs. So we've got to put our hands in our pockets as well. This is not going to happen immediately. Thank you, David. You've given us a 2-year time frame to make the decision. I would suggest there'd be at least 3 years to implement it if we made the decision. So you're talking about 5 years down the track. We need revenue now, immediately, so we need to consider that. But we would be stupid not to do this study. This study gives us the information basis to make an evidence-driven decision. So I would urge every councillor to support this paper. It makes sense. It's the logical way of doing it. It doesn't make the decision itself. It simply gives us the information to make the best decision for our city and community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Councillor Clow?
Is that too loud?
We've already set up a committee a couple of years ago, and that took a year or so. We spent quite a bit of money. My question is, why is this going to take 2 years? Why not 1 year? Why can't? Because the bottom line is that's going to be into election year, therefore nothing will happen. It'll be an election issue. It'll come back and we'll talk about it in the new year again, and it'll be basically 3 years away before we even start to make a decision on the 3-year implementation.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And through the Chair, I suppose the summary work program in Attachment B tries to break out some of the key tasks. I mean, there are a fair number of tasks to do in effect, and I suppose the most important thing here is trying to balance the need for change and speed, and a speedy recommendation, with a thorough process that takes the public of Auckland with us. If you look at lessons overseas, the key challenge of these pricing and smarter pricing schemes is public acceptability. It's really having the evidence and ability to take, I suppose, the public with the evaluation. So a fair bit of this is really going very thorough, and its intention to do a very thorough study and to, I suppose, ensure that all the stones are turned, I suppose. We were involved as officers in the planning part of this. We did say, could we push it a bit more? Is there things we could take off and move quickly? At this stage, that seems this is sort of what we need to do, and it's in line with international studies and evaluations overseas. So that said, we will be refining and evaluating the project plan as we go along, and if there's ways that we could move quicker and it made sense in terms of public acceptability and success of the project, we would be keen to do so.
Thank you, David. Councillor Close.
So, given there have been so many studies done, why are we reinventing the wheel? I know we've got certain Auckland-specific aspects to it, but given there is a lot of work being done on this, why are we basically spending as long to come up with a study and results that are probably going to be fairly predictable on what's been done around the world? Why can't we cut
Well, I think the
that
answer to that is that some have been successful and others have not been. The ones that have been unsuccessful have not been socialised with the residents of that city, or they have been on short time frames and not been thoroughly assessed. And then there are examples like Stockholm, where there was community resistance. It was introduced as a trial with acceptance from the community, and the community harangued its administrators not to stop the trial after 12 months earlier not wanting it, adamantly not wanting it. There are examples of Manchester that have not been successful. We want to learn from where it's also failed, not just been successful, because this has to endure beyond our lifetimes possibly. So I'm sorry I'm probably answering on behalf of the staff there, but we do need to do this well, absolutely thoroughly. Councillor Clow, do you have a further question?
No. I just stress that we do need revenues sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Can't agree with you more. Councillor Wayne Walker, speaking turn on this matter.
Yes, I'd like to speak to the matter. First of all, just want to agree with the Mayor. We need action, we need some money, and as much and all as this is going out into the future, a modest regional fuel tax at this point in time would meet our immediate needs. So my concern is, as much and all as this study might be going on, we need to do our own work to run alongside that, and that is imperative. The other concern that I've got, and it goes to the issue around socialisation, is what we could be doing now is doing the sort of trial that overseas cities are doing. Oregon, for example, I'm actually enrolled in their trial. These can be voluntary trials. We could kick this sort of thing off right now. We'd need some acceptance from the government, but there's no reason why we couldn't do that now. We'd get social acceptability. It can be based around the best technology, and that technology exists now. As far as the technology is concerned, and I hear some of the comments about problems, the enhancement in technology is occurring at an exponential rate. So we should not be basing our decisions on the technology now, but the technology that we can anticipate in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, and what the marketplace is driving. And that includes insurance companies and the like, who want to actually insure vehicles based on miles or kilometres travelled. And there are any number of companies, especially in the United States, that have apps now built around vehicle use. So there's a business model here, a private business model that runs alongside this. It really concerns me in terms of how we're doing this, and I'm looking at the steering group, that our council has some input into the process. And the reason I raise that concern is the previous process, which was the alternative funding study, just looked at dinosaur technology. It didn't look forward enough at value-added taxes. It didn't look at the GIS-based technology or smartphone technology. It was absolutely hopeless. So I hope that this study is comprehensive, is futuristic, and bringing the future forward in terms of application. And I say again, this council should take a lead and should embark on a trial. We could do that.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks, your call.
Yeah, thank you. My concerns, Mr Chairman, are somewhat similar to Councillor Close, because we've burnt a considerable amount of ratepayers' money over the years. We had the consensus building group back in 2013, 2012, looking at alternatives and congestion charging, and came out with a fairly lengthy report on that. Prior to that, we had another report, which was Get Auckland Moving, which also looked at tolling. So we seem to already have done quite a bit of work, and there's absolutely no reference in any of these reports about the work that's already been done. Now, I think that the ratepayers would be a little cross to know that we've done all this work in the past, and that there's been no reference to this work going forward. And I would have expected some of that, and why has that not occurred?
Thank you, through the Chair. Well, in effect, it has occurred. There has been work done looking at international lessons, but also, I suppose, valuations that have been done in New Zealand before. I just said it was on this in that part of that slide that currently is findings is presented to the governance group. So those could be some good findings, I suppose, for a future bi-monthly workshop to talk about. I suppose in terms of this project, it is a more thorough evaluation looking at a broader range of options. And I suppose I keep going back to the need for public acceptability and to do this thoroughly and to spend the time on it. If you look overseas, there often is a phase of acceptability around these projects. It starts off with a lot of enthusiasm, but as it becomes more real, the going gets tougher. So a lot of this is about ensuring that we have the right evidence to show that whatever way this is progressing, it will be a good outcome for Auckland.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I do support the work that going forward, but I do want to make the comment that we have burned a lot of ratepayers' money already on this, and to take another 3 years just seems an extraordinary amount of time to me, given the problems that we're currently facing.
Thank you, Councillor Quacks. I'd probably use the word invested a good ratepayer money in this, because the learnings out of all those bodies of work are sitting in behind this body of work and have been conveyed to Treasury, State Services, Ministry of Transport, our partners in this work, along with Auckland Transport.
Well, I don't know if the ratepayer would see it quite like that, Councillor Darby.
Well, we might have to do a job a little bit better in conveying that message, that it has been a good investment, and we'll take that note. I have Councillor Cooper for the next call.
Thank you. I won't speak long, Mr. Chairman, because the recommendation is just to delegate to the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor after all. However, I guess for me, as we've been talking about these things for a long time, even pre-amalgamation, and I mean, I do support, it's pretty hard to get people to pay congestion charging when they don't have an alternative other than to use a car. And that was one of the reasons why Takuri City opposed tolling of the tunnel. I don't know if I would now, but at the time, because there was no busway, the train wasn't that great, there's really not a good public transport offering in West Auckland. So for me though, we've never really done a full regional study at the state now, and we can't go out to the public unless we have that information. It's no good going out saying, what do you think of this? And they'll ask the questions and go, oh, we don't know. That's the bottom line. We have to have good information so we can, really communicate well and let people make really informed decisions about any kind of proposal that we might wish to go ahead with. So I do support the recommendations, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Newman?
Oh, Mr. Chair, look, I mean, I support this work, but it's always, when in smarter transport pricing generally comes down to a debate about the merits of distance or time-based fees for travel. My prediction is that inevitably in this exercise we will be conflating outcomes. Is this a process whereby we are in the business of transport demand management, or are we in the business of pricing externalities such as carbon emissions, or are we in the business of raising revenue? And it seems to me that actually road pricing, congestion charging, should be about pricing behaviours, but this is Auckland, so it always comes back to a debate about revenue. And the problem is that for this to successfully work, you do need to have alternatives to to the car, and alternatives are not readily available for everyone, so people can't easily make an alternate decision to the car.
Yeah.
And that is a very, very big problem, and it risks the acceptability of this particular scheme to our constituents, particularly those of us who represent outer suburban communities, which are a long, long way from any kind of a dynamic integrated public transport network. The other thing, Mr. Chair, is that if this is about revenue, revenue for what? Is this about motorists paying additional revenue for more roading infrastructure? Or is this about motorists paying more revenue that can then be allocated for public transport? And then who's going to fund the maintenance of that public transport infrastructure? And so I think that there needs to be some reflection on that, because that's what our constituents are going to be pondering as we move forward with socialising this to the community. The other thing I would say, Mr. Chair, is that the interim transport levy, nothing seems more permanent than an interim transport levy, given that that is a 3-year funding tool, and there is no alternate, it seems, on the immediate horizon. There will be, I foresee, a significant breach of faith, I suspect, if that transport levy is extended. And there will be some very difficult conversations that will need to be had in the long-term plan. And the one final thing that I would make, Mr. Chair, is that this to me kind of feels like a continuation of revenue for the purpose of promoting the government's priorities for transport in Auckland. This is not necessarily about raising revenue for our priorities. This seems to me about the government's priorities for public transport and for roading infrastructure. And so the government policy statement on land transport takes primacy over the long-term plan. And we could say, well, we've got ATAP, we're hanging on to ATAP. I believe that the ATAP will become increasingly subordinate to whatever the government wants to do in Auckland, as set out in the GPS, and that doesn't necessarily reflect all the aspirations that are had around this table for the kind of investment that we'd like in public transport.
Okay, thank you. Good points. Of course, ATAP has to reflect the GPS. The GPS is the lead document, but we'll be canvassing that in the near future. But I appreciate the points made. They're all good ones. Penultimate speaker being Councillor Watson.
Yeah, actually, it's more of a question, and it picks up on some of the comments some of the other speakers have made in terms of how transparent and communicative this project is, and we duly acknowledge the importance of that. We also say that the regular updates are just going to be going to this relatively confined group of decision makers. So I'm just wondering, in real terms, how open the 2-3 years are in terms of the people sitting around here and the local boards in conveying exactly what's going on. So we all know that different parts of Auckland, any different proposals might affect in a different way. How open and how immediate is going to be the relaying of where any particular point in the process is sitting is going to be for us? So this group's getting regular updates. What's the proposal for informing us, and how open is the whole thing? I mean, is it secret squirrel stuff, or is it going to be really, totally open and inclusive, as we seem to be suggesting, in order to win people?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I definitely hope it's not a secret squirrel process. I suppose in terms of this committee, some of the options we have is we have the bi-monthly workshops, so we can bring back, updates and discussions from that. At the main phases, we can bring these to the committee as key milestones. There will be a communication plan has been established, and is currently working how best to do that. It seems to be thinking that one of the ways to get the most public interest is things like having a website on Auckland Transport website, but branded as part of a project. The idea is, as the findings of the project emerge, that there is constant engagement with the public, and the key reason for that is that as it becomes more real to people, people will have lots of ideas, and some of those will be very positive, some of those in effect will not be correct. So we just need to ensure that the narrative around what we are finding is based on evidence and clear. So I suppose in some ways I could work with the chair here about those bi-monthly workshops as a first step to see what we wish to bring to the committee. And in terms of local boards, look, are very open to local boards being involved, and there's no intention for them not to be involved. It's parts of this evaluation more generally will be very important to them.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Now, I've had a further request from Councillor Casey to have another speaking turn. Councillor Casey.
I reserve my right to speak. Ask
Yes.
2 questions, one about
I'll
local
just say,
boards and
Councillor
one
Casey, I'm about
use of
to
funds.
use Chair's prerogative and give you a second speaking
Thank you.
turn.
I didn't speak before.
It is a second speaking turn because you did make comment. So, members, I'm just
Everybody makes comment.
I'm just
When
abiding
makes a
by the
speech, everybody
standing
asks a
orders
question.
that we have all signed up to. I am giving some leeway in this instance, but I will not necessarily continue to give that leeway. So, if at question time, make it clear it is a question. Do not lace it with comment. Put the question, please. Councillor Casey, your speaking turn.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. It's much appreciated. I won't abuse it. Look, Aucklanders have the right to a say in a major change to our infrastructure. Every Aucklander. And this is going to be a major change. And it seems to me that the last people who will have a say will be the public of Auckland in 2 or 3 years, when our consultants have narrowed down the options to 1, 2, 3 and 4, and it's now impossible to change it. If we had an integrated public transport system, if people could get around Auckland, where they want to go, at a price they can afford, with a reliable service, they wouldn't need to use their cars, and they wouldn't object to this. But this is way like 10 years too early, because we ain't there yet. And this is about revenue gathering. I've heard all the words. God, over the years, I think we started with tolling, we've had funding tools, road pricing, we've got network charging, we've had congestion charging, and the latest one today, smarter transport pricing. Smarter transport pricing. It's not transport. It's cars. It's roads. Smarter. I don't know what smarter means at all. It just seems to me to be mystifying the process for the public. And it's a bit like Auckland Transport's calculator. They throw in all the stuff, they put in all the evidence, and out comes a priority list. And to try and change that as an elected member is now an impossible. That's what I see happening here. And we're funneling it down, forgive me, just to the mayor and the deputy mayor. Well, I'm not actually supporting any of the recommendations, because as an elected member, again, I feel impotent. I feel like there is no job for me here other than to do exactly what I'm doing right now, to speak up for the people of Auckland. And, you know, gathering revenue by pricing our roads is not something I think you will get any support for at this stage, because I don't think the alternatives are there.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a smarter transport pricing project, and there's a lot that we need to learn about these things, because at the moment the work is not completed in Singapore. It is of a medium scope in Stockholm. It has failed in other cities. Councillor Walker was right in saying the technology is moving, but there are some really real challenges that the city has to face, that has been identified in the Singapore work. For instance, you need universal Wi-Fi and 4G to make the system work, a GPS system work. The GPS system does not work in motorcycles or cars that have flat or very steep windscreens. Think of trucks. It does not work where there's electrical interference or high levels of climate change as far as temperature is concerned, and humidity. There's a whole lot of challenges here that we have no options or optics over yet. So to take a stand about on one side or another is ridiculous, because you have not been given the information to make a stand upon. So personally, I like to get the information, get the knowledge, and then go out to our community with an informed set of viewpoints. One thing that we do know is our community's greatest frustration is congestion. One thing that we do know is they want alternative modes. Councillor Casey is also correct saying they want better PT. Yes, we all want better PT. Frees up our main arterials, frees up the motorway network, and enables freight and services to move more efficiently. The latest figures from the Chamber are talking about $5 to $7 billion of lost revenue for this city and region because of congestion. I haven't seen the modelling for that figures, but that's what I've been told. 5 to 7 billion. Imagine if you could unleash that each year, what it would do to our economy. So this program, I believe, strongly has to be supported. Let's look at Singapore, and they're not releasing theirs, if and when they do, until 2020-21. Because security of the system's a really big challenging issue, which is why a cell phone system won't work, in their opinion. This process has to be transparent, and we have to come back to the governing body and to the local boards as the stages progress, just like we did with the Auckland Transport Alignment Project. We need to be able to clearly articulate where we're trying to go. We can't build our way out of congestion. You can't just keep adding tunnels and lanes. It just becomes financially prohibitive. Alternative methods must be found, and they have to be funded. And to make the funding work, they have to be used. And where a congestion charge does work, it gives people a good incentive to change their way of behaviour for transport and for mobility, whether it becomes more active modes or more PT. So, Mr. Chair, I'm all for getting the information to understand this is new world thinking. We want a new world modern city. We want good transport options. We need to understand the systems that go hand in hand with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good debate, members. I'll put the motions before us here, A, B and C together. All those in favour say aye.
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 To the contrary, no.
No.
Declare that
Recorded.
carried. Sorry, Councillor Casey, did you want record?
Yeah.
On A, B and C, or just A and B?
Not a whole lot.
Okay, you don't want, okay, that's fine. Against A, B and C, Councillor Casey. Thank you. Members, we'll take a 5-minute refreshment break and come back here at about 11:03.